The Secret Language, Chapter 10, The Feast. For some time, Martha had been thinking they ought to have a midnight feast. "It's always supposed to be so much fun to go to boarding school and have midnight feasts," she said gloomily, "and we never have any at this old boarding school. I guess we have to have one. Who'll we ask, Vic?" "We could ask True, and Edith and Ginny," Victoria suggested. "And Sue and Eleanor?" "All right, we'll ask them. What will we have to eat, Martha?" "Oh, I don't know. What do people have at midnight feasts? I guess ice cream, and some of those good pickles, and cake, and cookies, and some orange drink. What do you think?" "Maybe we could have some sardines," Victoria said. "But I guess Miss Denton wouldn't let us eat sardines." "Oh, Vicky," Martha exploded. "What's Miss Denton going to have to do with our midnight feast? You're crazy. She isn't even going to know about it." "Oh, yes, you're right," Victoria said. The idea of the midnight feast did not appeal to her, and she hoped that Martha would forget about it, but Martha didn't. She began to make her plans at once and to issue invitations. "We're going to have a midnight feast in our room next Wednesday," she said to Edith Scott, after breakfast the next day. "You want to come?" Edith's round, red-brown eyes opened wide. "Oh, Martha, you're terrible. How could we have a midnight feast?" "Vicky and I are having it," Martha corrected her politely. "If you don't want to come, just say so. We're going to ask True and Ginny and Elle and Sue, too." "Well, I don't know. What are you going to have to eat?" Edith asked. "Cake and ice cream and pickles and orange drink and, some other stuff, candy, cookies, maybe sardines." Edith thought it over. "Well, all right, I'll come," she said. "When is it?" "Wednesday. We told you." "But what time Wednesday?" "Midnight, you crazy! When else would you have a midnight feast?" "Well," there was a long pause. "Well, all right, I'll come." "What a dumb girl," Martha said, as she and Vicky walked away to the school hall. By the end of the day, Martha had asked the other guests. Everyone except Ginny Frost accepted. Ginny had said that her mother didn't allow her to eat between meals. She always brought her mother into every conversation. Sue, Eleanor, and True did not want to come, but they didn't want to make Martha angry, so they accepted her invitation. Victoria never knew how Martha smuggled in the food for the midnight feast. She thought Mr. Hardy must have helped. Ever since the Halloween party, he had been friendly with Martha. At any rate, however she did it, Wednesday afternoon, Martha brought the food into their room and hid it in the closet. After supper, just before the singing, Martha whispered reminders to the guests. "Come to our room at midnight," she said. "Don't forget." Usually Victoria wanted to whisper in bed even longer than Martha wanted to, and when Martha went to sleep first, Victoria often lay awake making up interesting adventures. But that night she was so sleepy she did not see how she could possibly stay awake until midnight. She tried to carry on a whispered conversation with Martha, but in the middle of it she fell asleep. Martha got out of bed and shook Victoria's shoulder. "Oh, please, Vicky," Martha whispered. "You just can't go to sleep now. Wake up. It's only 9:30. "I'm sorry," Victoria said sleepily. "Let's talk about something exciting." But in a minute she fell asleep again, and once more Martha had to shake her awake. "Listen, Vic," Martha whispered. "I'll tell you a really scary story about—" "Oh, no, don't! I'm awake," Victoria assured her quickly. "I'm awake. Let's talk about something that isn't scary." She sat up in bed and tried to think of something interesting, but she began to yawn in spite of herself, and she lay down again. Martha climbed up to the upper bunk and sat beside Victoria. "Now stay awake," she said. "I'll tell you more about Richie." "All right," Victoria whispered happily. She loved to hear about Richie, although she did not know him. Richie lived in New York in the apartment house where Martha's family lived. He was 13 years old, and he could draw wonderful pictures, and he could carve things out of wood, and in the summer he chewed tar he dug out of the street. "Well," Martha began, "once Richie went to the circus alone, and he saw the sideshow. He saw the fat woman, and he saw Cuckoo the bird girl, and he saw a man who swallowed swords. My mother never would let me see the sideshow, but Richie saw it. And then once my uncle took Richie and me to Coney Island, and we rode on the roller coaster." "My mother and I rode on the Ferris wheel once," Victoria said sleepily. "Oh, a roller coaster is much better. I wonder what time it is." Martha slid down from the top bunk and looked at the clock. "Only 10. 2 more hours until time for the midnight feast." Martha was tired too, and Victoria was sound asleep. Martha sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and wondered what to do. She was discouraged and lonely. Finally, she decided to have the feast at 11 o'clock instead of at midnight, and she tiptoed down the hall to notify the guests of the new time. Sleepily, they promised to stay awake and come to the feast at 11. Martha was so sleepy herself that she lay down on top of the covers on her bed. Every few minutes she kicked the springs of the top bunk to keep Victoria awake. Every time Martha kicked, Victoria woke up and said, "All right, I'm awake." Just before 11 o'clock, Martha lit her flashlight and took the food out of the closet. The container of ice cream was soft, and ice cream dripped slowly from it. Martha spread her raincoat on the floor and placed the ice cream in the middle of it. She took the cake out of the box and put it beside the ice cream. Around them on the raincoat, she arranged the pickles, the fruit juice, the cookies, the candy, and the sardines. Then she turned off her flashlight and lay down again to wait for the guests. There was a loud crash, and she sat bolt upright in bed. It was morning. Miss Denton stood in the middle of the room. When the house mother had come in, her foot had struck the glass jar of fruit juice. The jar had spun across the room and crashed into the radiator, and now the fruit juice spread in a slow stream across the floor. In the dim light, Martha and Miss Denton looked around the room. The ice cream had melted out of the flimsy container. It had flowed over the raincoat and onto the rug. Silently, the house mother looked at the melted ice cream and the slowly spreading fruit juice, the sardines, the cake, the candy, the pickles. "Well, Martha," she said at last, "what is the meaning of this?" Martha looked away. Here's the picture. "Martha, what is the meaning of this?" the house mother repeated. "I just wanted to have a midnight feast," Martha said slowly. "A midnight feast? You should not have done this, Martha." The house mother's voice was stern. Martha nodded miserably. "Did anyone else come to this midnight feast, or was it just for you and Victoria?" "We did ask some other kids," Martha said, "but they didn't come. They went to sleep. And Vicky went to sleep. And I guess I went to sleep too. Anyhow, no one came and we didn't have it." She sighed. "Vicky didn't want to have it anyhow. No one else did. Don't get mad at them." "Martha, what in the world made you decide to have a midnight feast?" Martha tried to shrug in her old carefree way. "Well, at boarding school you're supposed to have all these wonderful midnight feasts," she muttered. "So I thought we ought to have one." "Oh, Martha, Martha, you thought you were supposed to have a midnight feast?" The house mother sighed. "You go out of your way not to do so many things you really are supposed to do." She spoke as though to herself or to another grown-up. Her voice was sad. Victoria woke up and leaned over the edge of her bed. "I'm sorry," she whispered to them both. "You girls should not have done this, Victoria," the house mother said. "I am disappointed in you both. I'll talk to you later, but now you must pick up this food and clean up the floor. I'll get a mop and some cloths." She shook her head and went out. That afternoon, after classes, Miss Denton called them both to her room. "I've decided that the failure of your plans is punishment enough for you this time," she said, "but I hope you will learn a lesson from this experience. I don't know that you will. However, I am not going to punish you." "Thank you," Martha said sincerely. "I do want to talk to you girls briefly about something I think of often. I am fond of you two, as I am fond of every child on my corridor. I enjoy you girls, and I think it is fine that in many ways you make up your own minds and do not copy others. The world will always need those who do not try to be just like everyone else." She stopped and looked at them. Then she went on, "But there is a happy medium between the child who wants to be just like everyone else and the child who refuses to do anything the way other children do. I hope with all my heart that you girls will be able to find that happy medium in the months and years ahead." She stopped again and sighed. She knew they were not hearing what she was trying to say to them. "You may go now," she said quietly. Out of her room, Martha gave a sigh of relief. "Glad that's over," she remarked. "Pretty ick and spick lecture, if you ask me." "I think she's pretty libosa, if you ask me," Victoria said rather coldly. The midnight feast was not mentioned again between them.